It's lights out and welcome back everybody to the Low Downforce podcast, the Forefront Formula One podcast. Only three of us again, but it's a different three. You've got J9, you've got Matt, and you have myself, Ben, but we are unfortunately missing Josh. He's dealing with real world stuff, which is obviously more important than a little bit of waffle in front of some microphones. So we hope to get him back soon. But maybe this was intentional because without jumping the gun, Ferrari had a little high and then an absolutely shocking low. That's right. We are coming off of the back of the Chinese Grand Prix, which included the first sprint race of the year. So a lot to talk about, a lot to unpack. But before we start to crawl through the weeds, just right off the bat, J9, 1 through 10, or I guess technically 0 through 10, what's your race rating for the second race of the season?
I gotta rate it a little bit higher than Australia. I really did like this race a lot. I'm gonna give it a solid 8. That's probably also a situation where I didn't think I'd be up at 3 a.m., but I found myself awake at 3 a.m.
Did you actually watch it live?
I actually watched it live.
No way.
I hate myself and love
my
myself
God.
all at the same time. It was actually it was surprising. I think that this season is just so different than last season that it's an 8 for me. It's very fun to watch the rookies. It's very fun to just kind of like get a mix up of different teams doing well. So an 8.
Wow. Matt, what about you?
Yeah, I had mixed feelings about the sprint versus the race, so I'll just do an average. It had between 6 and 8. We'll go with 7. McLaren 1-2, maiden pole for Piastri. I mean, just great stuff going on, but there just wasn't a lot of drama, which, you don't hope that anyone gets hurt or that there's any big crashes, but you like to see some big changes in the order, and we didn't get that this time as much.
Did we watch the same race? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm a McLaren fan. This was a 2 out of 10 for me, and I'm only expecting Monaco to be worse than this because this quite literally was Monaco without the history, I think, for me. Once the race kind of settled into a one-stop strategy, there was no overtaking at the front. There was very little going on other than the Haas's coming alive. I was so bored. I was about to say, I'm glad I didn't stay up until 3 a.m. to watch this, but J9 already stepping the bar up. I have mad respect there. So
yeah, maybe it was like a little bit of delusion setting in at 3 a.m. But I thought it was exciting seeing some of the different overtakes and tire strategies. I think that really came into play, and that really got my focus on who has hards, who has mediums, who's going to pit. Are they doing 1 or 2 stops? So we'll get into those details. But that's why I rated it so high.
Hey, that's why we have opinions. Everybody has one. What's yours? What did you think the race was? Give it a 1 through 10 on socials at Low Downforce Pod, in the comment section if you're watching along on YouTube. And even though he's gone, Josh, word for word, texted me. I said, race rating? He said, 0 out of 10. Ferrari is ass. So take that with a grain of salt if that's a legitimate race rating or not. But like I said, we'll get into it. But Ferrari had one of the weekends of all time. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think both of us based our ratings off of our respective teams. So that really was the deal for me.
I think my 8 came into play because although I was very sad to see Ferrari not do well, that was just for them to get disqualified at the end. That is a shocker. And I think that no one expects those kind of things. And so that's what made it an 8 for me.
So
I did not expect certain things.
I didn't go into it. In my notes, I literally wrote, and to be fair, we might have slid different details in. I said 2 out of 10. Most exciting thing happened after the race, parentheses, Ferrari double disqualification.
Fair.
Which, before we get into the worst of Ferrari, we might as well talk about the small glimmer of hope for Ferrari. Matt, if you want to take us through the sprint race a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lewis came out with pole, his first one in red. Max, Oscar, and Charles lined up behind him. And, Hamilton just took control of the race. There were some overtakes kind of in the middle of the pack, but we ended up with a Lewis win. So his first win as well in red, followed by Oscar, Max, George, Charles, Yuki, there we see a V-carb in that top 8 scoring points. Kimi Antonelli and Lando Norris. So it wasn't the best for McLaren overall. Obviously, Oscar had a great race, ended up on the podium. But yeah, no, I mean, 2 Ferraris in the top 5. That was a great start for them. And there's also Jack Doohan caused a collision with Gabriel Bortoleto in lap 18, so like towards the end of the race, and he ended up getting a 10-second time penalty and 2 penalty points. So we're already seeing penalty points getting dished out early in the season. Hopefully we don't see another Kevin Magnussen situation happen. And then one of the biggest, I don't know, for me, I like these classy overtakes, and I thought that Oscar's pass on Max in lap 15 was really just one of my highlights, because it just showed that McLaren is dominant, and Oscar was battling and giving Max a hard time for a while there. And I think that we're turning a corner where McLaren is becoming more dominant, and I love to see it.
I think part of the reason that overtake stood out to me is I know McLaren just won the Constructors' Championship. I know they started nowhere last year, wound up with the best car, and they're definitely starting this year with the best car. I'm just so not used to Max being overtaken on merit on track. And so it's still so new to me that seeing that move, like you said, it was nice to see. And it was also like, whoa, like, because I'm still not used to it. But
yeah, it was a shell shocker for me. Just like this is happening, and it's happening again and again.
But you mentioned Oscar, the lead McLaren, and that finishing in second just behind Lewis. Jumping one session later into quali, Oscar Piastri, I think you mentioned it in the race rating, in his third season, he finally gets his first Grand Prix pole position. And spoiler alert, he maximizes that qualifying position. So huge for him, just a confidence boost, especially we talked about how he was basically one turn away from having a phenomenal race in Australia, but that one slip really ruined it all for him. So he really did the most to stand out and bounce back this weekend. George Russell also deserves a shout out in qualifying for splitting the McLarens. We've talked about McLaren having a rocket ship this season. And so for George Russell to get on the front row in qualifying was also mega. And both V carbs. Yeah, so Isaac Hadjar, P7, out qualifying Yuki Tsunoda, but Yuki Tsunoda still in P9. So we get 2 V carbs in Q3, which any midfield team slotting both teams in there alongside the big 4, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull, obviously is a huge achievement. But speaking of Red Bull, there were also some underachievers. So we didn't talk about it in the sprint shootout, but Liam Lawson, both qualifying sessions this weekend, goes P20. And I fear that he is quickly running out of time on Red Bull. And people are saying, oh, well, now V-Carb is better. So is it fair to swap him with Yuki? But it's not looking great for him. And it wasn't looking great for a lot of rookies. Ollie Behrman out in Q1 and P17, well behind Ocon, who made it into Q2. And Gabriel Bortoleto, who I thought showed a lot of promise in the first weekend, P19, over half a second off of Nico Hulkenberg, who, in fairness, we know is a qualifying specialist, but 2 rookies out in Q1 while their veteran teammates made it into Q2. So not the best look, but like I mentioned, you've got Oscar on pole, George on the front row, and then you have Max and Lando, that tasty challenge on the second row to start the race. And that brings us right into Grand Prix Sunday, which for me was at like 9 a.m. the next morning. For J9, though, right at 3 a.m.
Oh,
So
yeah.
take us through it.
Oh, yeah. So it was not the craziest of races. Definitely way less yellow flags than, way fewer, yellow flags than Australia. But it was still very interesting. You know, right at the beginning of the race, you see Alonso's out. He retires early in the race due to brake issues. So honestly, I think that's right when I turned it on and was like, oh no.
Yeah,
What happened?
Gasly radioed in and it was like Alonso's brakes are on fire, and it wasn't long before he was back in the garage.
And overall, you know, it wasn't chock full of incidents. You had towards the beginning of the race, Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc involved in like an on-track incident where they kind of hit each other, front wing contact, Leclerc's front wing on Hamilton's car. Leclerc then continued to have issues because he didn't pit immediately. And so the broadcasters were really focusing on, is that a safety concern? Does he have to pit? Is it going to, not just slow his car down, but it's a piece hanging off of his car. So that was definitely concerning. The other incident that we saw was Jack Doohan penalized for forcing Isaac Hadjar off the track during trying to overtake. So that was really one of the only other incidents. Again, something that I thought was really intriguing on this race was the tire strategy. And so we really saw a lot of teams talking about it over the radio, broadcasters talking about it, who's on hards, who's on mediums, and who is pitting when. That was the key thing here. And so as we went through the race, you saw McLaren having a really good tire strategy. They knew when to pit and when would be good. And we also saw Mercedes having a really good strategy there. So with a podium finish, we talked about Oscar getting first, Lando second, a 1-2 for McLaren. You have George Russell taking third, which was huge. A, Max Verstappen's not on the podium. And B, to have McLaren and Mercedes up at the top. And Max is fourth. One of the really key things towards the end of the race was George Russell and Max Verstappen racing. And George actually kept him off. And that was great to see. That was great racing and something, again, that's so different from last season, that we're really seeing George Russell take that leadership position and really just make a name for himself. So you had Max Verstappen coming in fourth. Esteban Ocon coming in fifth, which was pretty big for Haas. That's good points for them, and something that they really didn't have last season towards the beginning. And that's really going to put them in a good position here. Kimi Antonelli coming in sixth. That's, again, huge. Alex Albon with Williams at seventh. Ollie Behrman, which was very exciting. Again, more points for Haas, and that's very significant there. Lance Stroll coming in ninth, so at least Aston Martin got 2 points there with Fernando Alonso out, and Carlos Sainz at 10th. So Williams double points, Haas double points, Mercedes double points, and McLaren. One of the biggest things here was Pierre Gasly being disqualified after the race for failing to meet weight regulations, which I only mention, A, because it's a disqualification, but B, Alpine is the only team with no points. So that's really sad and significant. And then, as we kind of mentioned before, and we prefaced but also spoiled it earlier, after the race, I think it was so exciting seeing Ferrari race. They did so well. Hamilton had such a good drive. So did Leclerc.
Yeah, even with that broken wing, he was still fast.
I know.
Really fast.
And so it was really good. And at one point, my boyfriend is a Verstappen fan, and so seeing Verstappen against Leclerc, against Hamilton, kind of going back and forth, and who's the better one, and then to just have them do so well, and then at the end just get it all stripped away. They are disqualified. Lewis for excessive skid wear on his car, and Leclerc for his car being underweight. So that was very depressing.
Yeah,
Ferrari just had a great weekend, but also a horrendous weekend.
I would say, yeah, just to go into the technical a little bit, but I'll try and keep it high level. So there's a requirement in Formula One that without fuel, a car with its driver must weigh no less than 800 kilograms. Charles Leclerc and Pierre Gasly were literally 1 kilogram under, which people say that probably does nothing, but the rules are the rules. And then for excessive skid wear or plank wear, there's basically a plank under the middle of the car that for safety reasons, you can't run your car so low that plank wears down too much. So Lewis's wore down too much over the course of the race. They checked that afterwards. And unfortunately, there's both slam dunk disqualifications, as is Pierre Gasly. And then just to caveat it, but no disrespect to like Ocon in fifth, like those standings are reflecting after the Ferraris finished fifth and sixth on track, but then with the disqualification, everybody moves up 2. And then right. Pierre Gasly finishing on track in 11th, everybody behind him actually moves up 3 spots. So I know you mentioned it's crazy because, I mean, VCarb was, or excuse me, not VCarb, Kick Sauber was, they had a rough year last year, not scoring points and then scoring their only points in the second to last race of the year. And they've
Yeah.
already grabbed some points. Everybody seems to be grabbing points. And it doesn't even feel like Alpine is bad per se. It's not like, oh, they're the team off the back struggling. They just, a little bad luck here and there, a little just lack of race execution. And they're quickly, the only team on 0 points. And you look at the flip side, you've got Williams is on 17 points already, which is the total points they scored as a team all
Amazing.
of last year,
Oh yeah.
only 2 races in. Aston Martin doing well. Haas is the second best midfield team right now. So there's a lot of excitement. It's weird. I mean, obviously, as a McLaren fan, there's a little bit of bias. I enjoy McLaren dominance a little more than Max Verstappen dominance, but you don't have to look very far beyond McLaren to see tons of storylines and tons of shakeup. I mean, with Ferrari's disqualification, because Alex Albon finished P7 in Australia, 1 spot ahead of Charles Leclerc, Williams on tiebreaker is ahead of Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship in 4th after 2 race weekends, which nobody would have had on their bingo card. So we haven't quite seen the full battle at the front yet, but there is excitement all throughout the grid right now.
I thought it was really interesting to have Williams with Albon doing better than Sainz. I chalk that up to Sainz still being new to the car, and still getting that up under his feet. But to have just like really strong racing from that team, that's just something exciting to have.
I think it actually makes
Yeah.
Hamilton's sprint win even more impressive because
It does.
Carlos is as new to Williams as Lewis is to Ferrari. And I would
Sure.
argue both incredibly talented drivers. We are going to see Carlos Sainz fighting up there with Alex Albon very, very soon. You're already seeing Lewis Hamilton, in some cases, exceeding Charles Leclerc. I mean, it's no
Yeah.
surprise. He's a 7-time world champion. He's statistically the greatest F1 driver of all time. But even he was shocked after the sprint race to have gone on pole and then won it flat out. So it's cool to see. It's cool that, he's actually coming into Ferrari. He's still learning a lot, but he's already putting up results that are worth the contract. Probably the most lucrative contract by a long shot in F1 history.
And it's such a shame for Sainz because that was his spot, right? And he is, getting used to his new car at a slower pace than Hamilton. But to be honest, I think that it could be also a Williams thing. Like Albon is used to their car, and I think Ferrari's just better tuned, right? It's more fine tuned, and Lewis obviously has the skill. But it just does kind of break my heart a little bit to see Sainz not only not go to another top team after having left Ferrari, but now struggling so much. One of my favorite drivers from last year. You don't hear me say that often as a McLaren fan, but I really like Carlos. And,
I would say it's also a little ironic that Carlos Sainz gets kicked out of Ferrari, understandably, because you got to make room for Lewis Hamilton. But he gets his first point for Williams because both Ferraris get disqualified. So there's a little irony in there. I'm also on the flip side. I'm not worried about Carlos because I think he'll come around. But I can't lie, I was a little worried. I really like Alex Albon, and I was worried that in his first season, really up against a strong teammate, that there was the chance that he could get exposed, that Sainz would come in and destroy him right away. And so it's great to see. And again, I think Carlos will come around, but it's great to see while Alex should have the advantage that he's maximizing it and putting up really, really good points for the team.
I'd be intrigued because we're saying that we feel really bad for Carlos Sainz, but I'd be really intrigued about the offer that he has. The deal.
I think he's doing just
quite
fine.
sure he's earning a lot of money in his contract and potentially more than he was making at Ferrari, potentially.
All I'm saying,
And have more say and have just so many other things.
all I'm
You
saying
never
is
know.
if Carlos
it
stayed
could be worse.
if Carlos stayed at Ferrari, he'd be lower in the Constructors' Championship right now. So everybody
True.
was
No,
saying,
I
"Oh,
would
poor
say-
Carlos," but he's
I
doing
would
all
be
right.
okay if Carlos Sainz listened to this and said, ha ha ha, no, it's not better, and challenged me. And, I was corrected.
Well,
That's a good problem to have.
if Carlos, if you're listening, shout us out. Hope you're a fan. We're fans of you, so we'd love for you to be a fan of us. I doubt
Exactly.
it though, but we've talked about Carlos's struggles. There are obviously other drivers who struggle. We call those our flops of the week, but before we bash on some people, we got to shout out the people who deserve it the most. Before we get to our flops, we must do our tops. I want to kick it back to you, Matt. Start us off with who was your top of race weekend 2?
Well, I don't know if the lights behind me are working exactly like I want them to, but they're supposed to be orange because I went with McLaren. We already talked about this being their 50th 1-2. Um, I can't say this for the whole season. Obviously they won constructors last year, but this is just really, really promising for them to be coming out hot. OP, for those who don't know, Oscar Piastri. Um, I'll call him OP quite often, but just great race and a lot of rage you could see after a horrible home race that he's just furious and he's coming back with some vengeance. I love to see it.
Hey, as a fellow McLaren fan, I am also happy. I'm curious, so I want to get y'all's opinion because it's very clear the media, 2 races, Lando has a Grand Prix win, Oscar has a Grand Prix win. The media is talking about McLaren being ahead, but now these guys are going to start hating each other, start fighting because they're each other's toughest competition as it appears right now for the Drivers' Championship this year. We talk about, oh, that's Drivers' Championship. That's where all the glory is. But if you listen to Andrea Stella, the team principal of McLaren, if you listen to Zach Brown in post-race interviews, he's the CEO of McLaren Racing. They seem like the team, or at least they're the biggest kind of proponent of this, is they're very team forward. I think don't get me wrong, they would love to win the Drivers' Championship, but at least publicly, they're pushing the value of the constructors more. And I said last year that I was glad that McLaren, Ferrari, both big brands, it came down to the final race of last year, long after the Drivers' Championship got decided, because it was like, we're bringing the value back to the constructors. And it doesn't necessarily surprise me. Teams like McLaren, teams like Ferrari, such iconic brands that, for them, there is a huge chunk that it's about the brand. They want to be the team with the most team championships. So I want to get your thoughts on, media is already starting to crash in on, these guys are going to turn into bitter rivals the way Senna and Prost did way back also for McLaren in the 80s and 90s fighting for championships. But what your thought is on drivers versus constructors? What's the feeling right now?
I don't think
Ooh,
they're going to turn on each other. I think it's going to be frustration with the team, frustration with the calls that are going to be made, whether or not if both of them are battling each other, they have to tell someone to back off. And more than likely, that person's going to be Piastri. But typically, they look at who's been going faster, who has a faster lap times. A bunch of different things about the car, the tires, all of that. And so, obviously, it depends on the race. But if you're just looking at it from a holistic standpoint, they're going to have Lando pull through to that first position. And so, I don't think it's going to be Lando versus Oscar and that they are going to fight, but I think it's going to be a big frustration with the team if that does happen. Now, obviously, they got to change the whole culture and make it so that it's about the constructors, because if they don't, then they're screwing themselves. And so obviously they're going to push that narrative and try to push that culture throughout their organization. And that doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. And so you kind of just hope for the best. And if they're able to stay friendly, that's great. And I think we'll just see. I think it's a waiting game here, but it will come down to if the races do continue as they have been, where even coming off of last season where both of them are just so strong, it's going to be the people calling the shots that are going to get the most issues there. But I also think it may be like a thing either within a contract or something of like, that you have to back down Oscar, you have to back down to Lando, and so you have to let him pass you. And so it really could be like an organization. Yeah, we're about the culture of team, but there is a hierarchy, and Lando's going to go first, or if it's Piastri, I don't know, but
Sure.
there is a hierarchy, and as a driver, you're going to know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a current hierarchy, and Netflix would love a story arc
Oh
where
yeah,
they become bitter rivals and then they become best friends by the end of the season. I do agree with you, J9, to some extent that, there's going to be some marching orders that they've got to. You can't always say, oh, well, we have two number one drivers. They do, but at the end of the day, it's going to be who has more pace. And then if they start to battle each other too much, you might see friendly fire like we just saw with Ferrari. That was a slip up here this week, but that those things happen. And was it Lando telling telling the engineers to have Oscar go faster, like push a little bit harder so that Lando would get out of the dirty air? I think there's going to be some back and forth. Lando, in my opinion, has like the kind of default number one slot, but it could change, and I don't think anything's set.
It's interesting. I know Netflix is probably rubbing their hands on all the Lando v Oscar episodes that they can come out with. But it's interesting because Lando, we know, is under contract through 2027, I believe. And Oscar just signed another contract extension for at least as long. And, I think it's one of those things where, I mean, neither of those drivers, Oscar, one of the hottest talents of recent time, coming up through the ranks of F2, F3 and into Formula One. Obviously, McLaren snatching him away from Alpine. And then you've got Lando, who kind of this resurgence of the team is kind of built around Lando. But I don't think you offer both of those guys long-term contracts if you don't think that they can, for the most part, get along, even competing. So I don't know. To me, I think this season it's going to be into thirds. So I think the first third is going to be a lot of maybe some team orders here and there, like we saw in Australia, not because they want somebody to win or not, but I think it's going to be very constructors focused. The first part of the season is going to be a lot of how many 1-2s can we bag? How big can we grow this constructors gap? I think that middle chunk of the season, the European summer, is going to be the toughest fights between them because it's going to be all right, this third of the season, prove to me which of you two is faster. And
yeah,
then
yeah.
and then if Lando really shows out, or if really Oscar shows out and winds up dominating that section, then my guess is in that last final stretch, they're going to get the preferential treatment if it's needed in a championship battle. But
I like it.
it's a lot of talk
I
about
guess we'll see.
McLaren. I want to bounce to
That's a good top.
I would say I want to bounce to another team. I want to bounce to Ollie Behrman. We talked about Haas bagging mega points, P5 from Ocon, but I want to talk about Ollie Behrman in P8. Obviously, a little bit of the position gain was because of the 3 disqualifications ahead of him, but still goes from P17 in qualifying all the way up to P8. A lot due to multiple overtakes on track, but I was impressed with the overtakes. He had back-to-back overtakes through the field. We're down that really long back straight, braked early, let kind of the lead guy kind of outbrake themselves and then undercut, leaving that turn and really make 2 good overtakes. And then to cap it all off, really the main reason I had to give him top is both of those overtakes, he comes on the radio and says ciao as he's making the passes, which
That was so smooth.
is a little audacious to do when you're not even fighting in the points at that point, but you got to respect the confidence. He had a brutal weekend in Australia, multiple crashes. He finished the race, but not in a meaningful position per se. So to see him bounce back, bag points, just look good on track and get his confidence back, love to see it.
Yeah. And for me, the top would definitely be Mercedes, and it's going to go from my top to my flop. Mercedes just coming out so strong this season. I think Russell, again, has really been taking that lead position very well, really been showing out strong. And with Kimi as a rookie, he is just killing it. I just, to finish P6 in your second race, and you finished so strongly in Australia as well, I want to say he was also P6 in Australia.
P4.
P5,
Oh yeah, sorry. Yes, P4. He made my
P4.
hot take.
That's right. Just incredible. And so I think with such strong driving and just to really come out and prove Mercedes still is on the top was really big for him. And that leads me to my flop of another team. We already talked about him, but my biggest flop is Ferrari. Those things are avoidable issues that you just lost significant points for, and so that's just a huge flop. You could have been second in the constructors standing, maybe even third, but that is just really bad. Thankfully, Hamilton got some of the points from the sprint race, but that was a very depressing weekend for them, and I think that was the absolute flop of the
I'll
race.
say Josh told us to complain about Ferrari for him since he can't
Yes,
rag on his own team in his absence.
you're welcome, John.
Charles, I'll get into that in
Here.
a second. Lewis's disqualification to me is just egregious failure because one, you have the
Yeah.
sprint race, so you have information on how the plank wear is going. To me, it highlights a bigger problem that
Mhm.
Ferrari has to decide between ride height and performance. And if they really want to be competing towards the front, so far they've had to risk kind of that plank where they get caught out, they get disqualified. We saw in Australia, though, they have a little bit higher of a ride height and they're not really competitive at all. And so Ferrari Hamilton's disqualification might be signs that Ferrari is in deeper
Yeah.
shit than most people realize. The thing that I find really interesting, not only of Charles's disqualification for being underweight, but that same reason that Gasly was disqualified, is all of the teams, because of tire deg earlier in the weekend, thought that this was going to be a 2-stop, and it turns into a 1-stop. When was the last time we saw a disqualification like this? It was George Russell being disqualified after winning the Belgian Grand Prix last year, where he changed from a 2-stop to a 1-stop, and Alpine alluded to excessive tire wear being the reason that the car was underweight, which is so interesting because you get more tire wear by running tires longer. So it's almost comparable to last year where a last minute or
Right.
kind of race time decision change in strategy. Like, we talk about strategy being super important. It's not only about being the fastest and finishing on track, it's about not getting disqualified too. You make last minute decisions that you're not fully prepared for, and you wind up with some consequences that are incredibly undesirable. So I found that very interesting and very similar to George's disqualification from the win that we saw last year.
So
But
That's
you would have had
wild.
this as your flop too, or you're going a different flop
I'm
then?
going different flop. I'm going Jack Doohan. Speaking of disqualification, Jack Doohan is now on 0 points in the championship and 4 penalty points. So he's racking up points in the wrong category. They were both talked about. Jack Doohan obviously causes an incident with Gabriel Bortoleto in the sprint, 10-second penalty, but also 2 penalty points. And then in the race, forces Hajar wide. It's unfortunate because he just locks his tire and that forces
Right.
Isaac wide. But like I said earlier, the rules is the rules. So,
Yeah.
Yep.
and
It wasn't egregious,
four
but
penalty points
that.
is 1/3 of the way to the 12 needed to be suspended for a race. And
Yeah.
I've supported
Racking
Jack.
them
I
up.
don't think outside of those he's looked horrendous, but there's already all of this rumor in the paddock or in the team, around the team, that they're just waiting a few races to replace Jack Doohan with Franco Colapinto, who they signed as a reserve driver in the offseason. I'm not saying I think Colapinto could do better, but Jack Doohan has to stop giving the team reasons to replace him. He needs to go out, have a couple signature performances quick that makes the team a little more hesitant to make a switch that is being alluded to.
Yeah, I mean, it was smart of Alpine to sign Colapinto, and those rumors have been
Yeah.
circling since we even saw, like,
When the
before the
signing
season even
happened.
started. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's such a shame, and I also chose a rookie, or not a rookie, technically not a rookie, but close to one for my flop. Somebody else who is basically giving reasons to his team that he should not be there, and that's Liam Lawson. I mean, the dude's going to get himself fired. he did end up in 14th and 12th in the sprint and the race respectively. Obviously, that 12th place would have been lower without the disqualifications, but 20th in both qualies. I mean, yes,
Yeah.
he's making up spots, but the dude, there's times where it looks like he's playing bumper cars, just bumping wheels with people, and I think he
Sergio
performed.
Perez,
Yeah,
Liam
well,
Lawson, can't tell the difference.
they just Yuki is becoming a clearer and clearer option for Red Bull, but I wonder. We're not doing a track take this week, but I do wonder, is this going to send Liam back to like a V
Yeah.
carb spot if he keeps this up, or is he just going to be out? Like who is Red Bull going to backfill? I don't
But,
think that they
I
have
mean,
as deep of a bench.
with the history, does Yuki want the promotion? V-Carb is actually looking good. I know V-Carb's strategy team is screwing Yuki like crazy. Yuki should be a 2 for 2 on points finishes and has gotten the short end of the stick. So yeah, it's all to watch for. As you mentioned, Matt, we don't have a race this weekend. We just finished a doubleheader. So not this coming weekend, but first weekend in April, we have the Japanese Grand Prix. Beautiful race, beautiful racetrack. It is worth tuning in for. If you're like J9, you can stay up in the middle of the night because I think it's a 4 a.m. race. But before we get to that race, we will have a predictions episode. We will have a preview for the third race of the season. But until then, digest these first 2 races. It's sad, I know, no F1 this weekend, but we're still trying to process and everything that's happened, and we've got even more questions and uncertainties going in. So 2025 season is just getting started. It's already a doozy, so a lot to talk about. So thanks for being on the journey so far. Continue with us all season long. We will talk to you very soon. Stay speedy. Goodbye.